Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and today I want to turn my attentions towards the Darklands. You see, we're expecting the Chaos Dwarfs at some point, possibly this year, maybe next, and I've been thinking a lot about them, mostly because I've been going over my own Chaos Dwarf miniatures and building up some lists, and I've had some ideas on what I'd like to see from the Chaos Dwarfs in the future when they eventually get implemented as a fully playable race in Total War Warhammer 3. So it's not like everything, it's just some mechanics, and I just want to talk about it because we haven't free crafted in a while and it's always kind of nice to do. So yeah, without further ado, let's begin. The one thing I really hope that the Chaos Dwarfs do have in the lands of the Darklands, and maybe a little bit outside, would be the introduction of a rail network. So if you remember Total War Shogun 2's Fall of the Samurai DLC, then you will already be very much aware of this. But for those who don't, let me just read the entry on the Total War wiki so we can all be brought up to speed. So in Fall of the Samurai, movement ranges for armies and agents is initially much shorter than their equivalent in Total War Shogun 2. However, armies and agents alike can make use of a rail system, using trains to ferry them across the land more rapidly than normal marching would allow. This is useful for quickly shipping freshly trained troops to the front lines or anywhere else they're needed, as long as provinces support building a rail system. To use such a rail system, select an agent or an army, then right-click on a railway station. Selecting a station on the map provided moves them from one station to another. While traveling on a rail, armies and agents will still deplete movement points, but at a much more efficient pace. They automatically disembark at the nearest railway station if they run out of movement points before reaching their destination. Not all provinces can build rails. Provinces that can support rails begin the campaign with a telegraph office, which needs to be upgraded before they function as railroads. Provinces that allow railroads only exist on the main island of Honshu and generally include the provinces on the south side of the island. Rails can be sabotaged by agents or damaged by armies, rendering them temporarily useless. Even having armies halt at a rail prevents passage through it. Okay, so sounds pretty cool, doesn't it? And if you haven't played Shogun 2 Fall of the Samurai, you should. It's actually really good. So essentially what this would allow is quick transportation across the Darklands, which, let's be honest, would be kind of needed. Right now we don't know if new locations are being added into the Darklands, but as it stands in vanilla, there is a lot of space between all the different settlements. So being able to move from major settlement to major settlement via railway, which we're kind of expecting anyway, even though, you know, Demon Engine would probably be a normal unit, it would just be kind of cool to be able to transport your armies quickly and efficiently, and that way you can reinforce your south if you need it, or north if Archaon decides to declare war on you, or taking all your armies to the western part of the Darklands in case you want to then declare war on the dwarfs and take over the Kara's Anchor. Now, we technically already have a rough system already in place in game, which is the trade mechanic, the caravan mechanic for Grand Cafe, as let's be honest, there's no way in hell a normal army can go from, you know, Grand Cafe all the way to Marienburg in 10 turns and back. Well, it depends on the location, but you know what I mean. We already have like a caravan system, a railway system. The only difference is it would be maybe instant teleport, or it would take maybe just one turn or 2 turns depending on the location, rather than moving your army traditionally and taking like 5 or 6 turns, or maybe even more, because the Darklands are really big. So yeah, this would be a localized mechanic, which I know some people wouldn't be too keen on. You'd have to build a building specific for that. But think of it like a port building, where we don't actually have ports in the Darklands because there's no water there. But you know what I mean. It's just to add a little bit more flavor, a little bit of flexibility, and these types of things are generally quite cool. The next would be their own corruption. So this is something which kind of sounds like a given, but I don't know, it just kind of gets me a little bit worried that they might just be lumped in with Chaos Undivided corruption, and yeah, that would make sense, but the Chaos Dwarfs aren't an undivided faction. They follow Hashut. He is the lord of smog and ash and soot, so I want to see a proper form of corruption here, where it's looking more industrialized rather than, you know, fire, 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 and fire. So just imagine a lot of smog around the area, you know, just industrialized looks. This is a Chaos Dwarf aesthetic, and having different effects, because it would focus more on pollution rather than anything else. So imagine as when it's spreading into other locations, the pollution would reduce population growth. It wouldn't necessarily affect you because, well, you know, your race and faction's already used to that, but it would affect everyone else. Public order would become lower, growth rate would be lower, hell, maybe even because of all the smog, resources from special resource buildings would be lower too, as people wouldn't be working, essentially. Now, there has to be negatives to you. So the higher the pollution, or ash corruption or sorts, or whatever they want to call it, then there's a chance that slave revolts. So this means that slave armies can spawn within the lands, and, you know, they'll be mixed up of various different units, usually low tier and stuff, but they can cause some problems that you'll need to get rid of them. This also kind of works for you, as it means that you can get some bonus XP for your characters as you kill off any slave armies, but the main idea is, you know, revolts are known to happen within the Darklands. This is famously what happened with the Chaos Dwarfs almost being destroyed as the Black Orcs turned against them and decided to ravage the Darklands. And I think something like this would be kind of cool. Obviously, there should be a little bit more to it, but the idea is just to be different, you know, be interesting, and obviously just having a different aesthetic look, because the Chaos Dwarfs are their own race in their own right, and it would just be a shame if they had their standard undivided corruption. Now yes, an item is already in game which can be found, and that itself gives undivided corruption, but keep in mind that, well, right now we don't have a Chaos Dwarf corruption or whatever they want to call it. So yeah, this could easily just be changed. You know, it's just a value that can be done from the table. You could even go into the mod tables yourself and just switch it from undivided corruption to Slaaneshi corruption if you wanted to. Doubling back on the slaves, so the Dark Elves themselves had a brand new slave mechanic which introduced in one of the most recent patches, and essentially it's just taking from a copy-paste from the devotee mechanic for Nekari. And while personally I do like the system, I still think it's a bit bare. I mean, that's all I can really say, especially since we're going to expect Chaos Dwarfs, which very heavily rely on slaves. Now, the system itself isn't too bad. You get slaves from battles and all the usual stuff. You need to use slaves for certain buildings, and hell, you can even use slaves to buff up a certain region for a while. So I have some ideas on how the slave mechanic could even be better for the Chaos Dwarfs specifically, maybe even Dark Elves too. First up, slaves should be a tradable resource. So if you want diplomatic relations with other Chaos Dwarf factions, maybe even Dark Elf factions too, if they get this also, this would be a way to go about it, as it makes sense for a faction that's so heavily reliant on slaves to build up their buildings and so on, that you'd be able to have that there, right? You'd be able to trade slaves as if it was worth money, and, well, you don't have to do it for just diplomatic relations. You could do it for cash also, and it should be two different types of currency that you should be micromanaging in a sense, which might not sound fun, but this means that you'll be able to keep the other Chaos Dwarf factions at bay whilst you're dealing with everything else if you are kind of low on cash, essentially. Then, afterwards, you would be able to use slaves for the mechanics just like the Dark Elves, right? All that stuff is cool. But there should be extra options to use slaves to just increase the construction time of buildings, kind of like just like a pop-up effect, right? Say, for example, you have a capital building which is going to take 6 turns or so, right? Maybe you're in a area which, you know, is uninhabitable by you, so you've got all the negatives. So what I'm saying here is that you should be able to speed up the construction time by using slaves. You sacrifice a bunch of them, and yeah, it goes down from 6 turns down to 1 if you have enough slaves. And this would be a function when you're constructing a settlement. Think of it in a very similar sense to when you take over a settlement with the Skaven, where you can use food to actually just turn your capital city from tier 1 all the way to tier 5, but instead of it being there, you can use it on every single building. You just need a lot of slaves. But finally, slaves themselves should be a very heavy micromanageable resource. The more slaves that you do have, the more respect you get from the other Chaos Dwarf factions, meaning that you will get better diplomatic relations with them in general. Higher slaves would also mean a higher chance at revolts, which we talked about earlier in this video, which would be a negative at first, but then would be a benefit, as when you get to the mid to late game area, you know, those revolt enemies would easily be enough XP for you to farm up on new lords to just level them up So yeah, kind of works out in both. However, low amount of slaves, which means that you'll get less revolts, but you'd get less diplomatic relations with the other Chaos Dwarf factions, as they'll start to see you as a weak leader. So it's a chance for them to attack you or declare war on you. I think something like that would be kind of cool. And lastly, for a big thing, this is kind of going back to the railway system, but it's actually based on the units. We need a railway constructor, essentially. Not a railway, but a demon engine thing. So, if you don't know, the demon engine is something really popular from the army book, from the Tamilcon series. Essentially, what you could do is get the demon engine, which was the main unit, and then get some add-ons to it. I think that's probably the best way to say, where you would just basically attach other stuff to it, you know, other forms of artillery, and yeah, it was kind of cool and it was pretty interesting. So what if we had a way to actually do this in Total War Warhammer 3, where you'd get a demon engine and then there'd be a separate mechanic, a separate page, or, you know, touchable button, which would then allow you to upgrade the demon engine to have a different hauler in the back of it, right? Sometimes even two, depending on how big they want to make this. But then you could have a demon engine with a steam cannonade or a skull cracker, a death shrieker, just attachments to make it even more terrifying. This would be an absolutely devastating piece of machinery, and it would cost a lot of upkeep to have. It would be horrendously overpowered, but I think the really high upkeep, because it would be the upkeep of a demon engine and then a upkeep of the Skullcracker added on, or whatever else you add on to it, right? So you'd have to think ahead if you want to do this, because obviously it's going to cost a lot of your finances, and it wouldn't be as common, right? So maybe you could only build up a demon engine once every 20 turns or so, kind of like a right, and then go from there. This is just an idea that I've just actually had as I was working this video. I think I talked about something similar in the past, like a year ago or two, but I've been working on my Chaos Dwarfs, like I said, on the tabletop, so I've just been kind of thinking about how this could be done, and yeah. I mean, I like the idea. It would be kind of interesting. I mean, let's be honest, the Chaos Dwarfs should be kind of cool, and something like this would be kind of awesome. Now, before we end this video, here's just a little bit of a bonus. I don't know how well this could work, but I think it'll be kind of fun. So, you know, spellcasters for the Chaos Dwarfs eventually turn into stone, right? It's a petrification that's very common with that particular race because they're not really supposed to be using magic. So what if this could be a very interesting thing? If your lord dies by miscasting, which I imagine will have a higher chance of miscasting than most spellcaster lords, there's a chance of them becoming an auxiliary, which you can then give to your other spellcasters and reduce the chance of them becoming a, you know, statue again. The idea is you might lose some lords from miscasting. This is going to be expected, and this might actually be a way to be able to just have some sort of minor mechanic, but just to counter that miscast chance. I think something like that would work out quite well, and eventually, when your character does become immortal, where it doesn't really matter if they die or not, then you can take the item away and provide it to a smaller ranked lord that might have the chance of miscasting and dying, right? Like, miscast and dying aren't really that common. Well, sometimes they are. I've had it every now and then, and I've seen it from the AI. So I think this would just add a little bit of flavor and just a little bit of help. Now, these are just some ideas. It's just something that I kind of wanted to talk about. We don't know exactly what's happening with the Chaos Dwarfs just yet. Hell, we don't know when they're coming out. But I'm thinking about the future, and it would just be kind of cool if we had like the rail system, something more in-depth when it came to slavery, especially for the Chaos Dwarves. I don't know. These are just basic ideas. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Let's start a bit of a discussion. I'm just rather curious to see what you guys expect from the Chaos Dwarves themselves. So yeah, I'll see you all again very, very soon. Have a good day.